I'd like to acknowledge that this class and presentation are taking place on the unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. Our time with Columbia Park has been engaging, challenging, and inspiring. While difficult, this project has been a lot of fun. When we first visited the site in February, Kristian on video from Toronto, we tried to get a sense of the site's potential, take stock of its characteristics, what it made us feel, and what feelings we felt it could evoke in a future where its context was wholly transformed.
So Tyler had explained his in-person experiences at the site. As sketching out these experiences helped us understand the emotional experience of the site that cannot be felt in photos. So some of these experiences were shadows of the trees on the ground, children playing, and the vastness of the site. And through sketching, we also observed the site's surroundings, nature, and the topography, which helped understand its water flow and drainage, and also the areas that were moisture retentive. We observed the squishy earth, seagulls and crows, smells of the exhaust, wind exposure, and light and shadow. So using these sun studies, we analyzed the sun at different times of year to understand opportunity for planting and constraints caused by the heavy shadows of the future buildings. While studying Oak Ridge's cultural history, we came across the Chinese market gardens. This was a parallel food network that thrived on the relationship between the Musqueam First Nations and the Chinese Canadians. Despite legislative discrimination, which made it hard for Chinese Canadians to obtain water and land, these Chinese market gardens were successful and fed Vancouver for a long period of time. Today, we find that Oak Ridge does not reflect or represent this history or the high demographic of its Asian population. We think these oppressed groups need to be recognized, which is especially important in these times of progressing anti-Asian violence. So with the Chinese market gardens in mind, our design statement is to design a commemorative and pedagogical space that serves as a stormwater garden and facilitates the interaction of people across ages, cultures, and abilities.
To us, designing a public space meant creating an environment that was inherently democratic. A space that was innately user-friendly, offered equivalent interests and experiences, comfortable and welcoming, commemorative and reconciliatory, and non-commercial. Inspired by the land and the relationships it fostered, we thought what the space might look like if it functioned as it did. What if we drew inspiration from beyond the Chinese market gardens of pre-war Vancouver? Inspired by the idea of Chinese agriculture, we dug into motifs we were able to generate from rice paddy terracing. And as we iterated, ideas would begin swirling of experiences of what our site could offer. Seen here, a market for non-Western produce so as to differentiate from other nearby markets, terraced gardens, rainwater infrastructure, and activities for old and young.
Arranging our program through cardboard modeling, we developed our sloping terrace forms and also developed a raised promenade bridge that can optimize the wetland and drainage below. This is our plan of Columbia Market Gardens in context with future development and the Alberta Street green infrastructure. The main areas include the gardens, the promenade, the wetland bog, the commons area, and the play area. So the garden would be seasonal and the promenade would serve as a market, and the bog would have areas for activity and also will include a play area. And overall, these spaces will be educational where people can have the opportunity to learn about gardening, green stormwater management systems, hydrodynamics, and native ecologies. In a deconstruction of our plan, we have the hardscape and path system and the softscape of meadow, lawn, wetland, gardens, and canopy cover.
We also aim to improve the site's capacity as a pollinator habitat, its provision of food and materials, groundwater recharge and flood control, restoration, activity, carbon sequestration, and local climate regulation. To facilitate user-directed learning, an emphasis was placed on wayfinding. The green signs at the entrances for park directions and resources, the signposts for wayfinding, and the smaller signs for children, this example having the Musqueam alphabet. We also included signage that honors its history, the community, and the community the site supports. intended to foster feelings of safety and inclusion at each major entrance. Beyond form, other components of the site were inspired by various existing places as well, many of which were projects here in Vancouver. The gardening program inspired by Earth Hand Gleaner Society, and as you'll see, the planting itself is inspired by Pacific Spirit and Camosun Bog. The playground drawing inspiration from Buga 05 in Munich, and the promenade from various Tourandscape projects, as well as the High Line in New York.
In this site overview, you can see that the bog and water play are at the low point. The raised bridge, which is a venue for the garden produce market, is above the wetland. The gardens transcend with the commons area, and the high points serve as a lookout point. And our materiality includes drainable EPDM for the wet playground, brick and bamboo for the hardscape and garden, bee brick for pollinator habitat, and sandstone for the path system. This is the west entrance to the market promenade in the late summer. People can purchase non-Western produce such as lotus root, opo squash, taro root, and Japanese eggplant, while experiencing the vastness of the park and viewing the bog below through the openings along the bridge. The red brick is a symbol of joy and luck, and it's a means to unify with the plant palette and for its textural interplay with native foliage.
Up to this point, we were cognizant that our plans represented one side of the Musqueam-Chinese relationship. With our planting, our goal was to evoke the stories of the Musqueam people. We decided to do this by emulating natural plant associations. It quickly became apparent this strategy had the potential for incorporation into our pedagogical framework. Descending the terraces, the microclimatic and soil conditions change as they do on the side of a mountain, facilitating the development of varying plant communities and associations. This was achieved with a palette strongly geared towards plants you would find in the Lower Mainland, specifically Pacific Spirit Park and Camosun Bog, the land the Musqueam oral histories indicate as their origin. Native planting was a means to achieve a sense of place. Columbia Market Gardens belongs and only belongs in the Lower Mainland. To heighten the impact, we embellished with coloration, architecture, and seasonal displays with a select few non-natives. Red and its analogs dominate both the native plants and many of the embellishments, and along with their texture are intended to play with the site's materiality. Culturally, bogs evoke a sense of mystery and a connotation of deep and eerie sensorial attributes. We set out to represent Camosun Bog to a community that may not appreciate them in a way that, say, we might. We knew there would be attributes we may have to augment, but that we would have to do so sensitively and without sacrificing authenticity. For a user, walking through the bog is intended to evoke a sense of solemnity, a characteristic lending itself to the programming of introspective individual activities like meditation, tai chi, yoga, or sitting down to read, a quiet respite from the rest of the bustling park and urban center. Attention to the spatial arrangement of the planting also allowed us to frame some of the site's more precious views. From the top of the park, a row of arbutus and kinnikinnick guides the user into the space, from which the entire park enters view as the land drops away. A motif of paperbark trees like arbutus runs throughout the park. The incorporation of rainwater was also central to the renewal project. Interfacing with Alberta Street's forthcoming stormwater plan was a mandate, but we wanted to go beyond. Stormwater, by definition, has come into contact with the ground or roadways and is unfit for human use without remediation. But if you can intercept that rain and store it, it can be safely employed. In Columbia Market Gardens, we've used off-site rainwater infrastructure to stockpile and use throughout the drier months in the gardens, the play area, and ultimately to allow it to infiltrate back into the soil where it can recharge the Quadrosands aquifer.
The garden terraces are a place for instructing and learning, while captured rainwater from the cistern can be used to water the garden. The commons area is not only a place for people gardening to rest, but also a space that offers an outdoor kitchen for communal cooking events hosted by organizations and local restaurant businesses. This is a place where people can come together to learn about culture and food. During autumn, one can come across a moon festival event with smells of steamed taro and crab filling the air. While enjoying the food, one can admire the fall foliage and see vegetables like pumpkin and squash being harvested. The wet playground is at a low point area surrounded by lawn and meadow for the sense of seclusion and safety. The red EPDM rubber is undulating and drainable. Being at the end of the rainwater system, play elements use the cistern rainwater for fountains, a bamboo water spout, and a water wheel. And at a glance, this is how we change the moisture profile. So from this project, we learned that landscapes in Vancouver are too regularly reflective of its white majority, and this often results in lackluster design like what Columbia Park at present exemplifies. But Vancouver isn't as homogeneous as its park system would have you believe. We grew to feel like designing with the intention of inclusivity not only presents an avenue for compelling, inspired, and engaging spaces, but an opportunity to reflect on local and global histories with honest and earnest consideration, and to develop common environments that could serve and excite everyone. And with the ever-present threat of the depreciating quantity of urban public space, it becomes increasingly important for policy decisions to emphasize the quality of the spaces we create. And that's the end of our presentation. Thank you so much.